You're listening to Murder Not Murdering with Erin
and Autumn,
a true crime podcast about murder and murdering.
But we are not murderers.
Welcome back, folks, to another Murder Not Murdering with Erin and
Autumn.
That's us. Hey, Autumn. I would like to talk about some true crime news.
Tell me.
Well, it's kind of been out there for a second, but we've talked about the Savannah Guthrie kidnapping of her mother several times. And recently it was released that she received a ransom letter actually fairly early on to everything that said that her mom had died and that it was an accident and they felt terrible for it, but they also wanted $1 million.
Right? So I'm only laughing because it's like, oh, feel so bad, but pay me money.
Yeah, but I still want $1 million if you want her body back, which is so fucked.
What a joke.
I know. Just horrific. I mean, a body does provide closure, but still.
Yes, but extorting the family to get that closure is disgusting.
No, I'd be like, you are not getting a fucking cent from me.
The really sad part is that it kind of confirmed that they took her because of Savannah. In the beginning of the letter, it said, "Hello, Savannah."
Yeah, I mean, obviously they took her because of her celebrity status.
Well, it's obvious now, but I mean,
they knew she had. I mean, at the time, didn't we all suspect that they took her because they knew that she had wealth?
Either that or just to get back at somebody. I mean,
it would be a really weird thing to just target one random old lady. I mean, the whole thing was weird. Like the way that they came up and the way that they were holding their gun and all of it and putting the plants in front of their hand. It was all very weird. Very
TMZ
amateur.
Has been in the middle of this because
like the whole time
been sent these ransom letters in addition. And the theory is that it's a woman.
Oh, that's interesting.
That it's a woman.
I thought that from the way that they walked.
Mm-hmm.
From the first time I saw it, I thought that from the way that they walked. I was like, could that be? And that's why they like bulked up their clothes to kind of confuse you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they suspect it's a woman.
I mean, that makes sense. I don't know. The whole thing is so sad, though. I just feel for her family, but
I do too.
Fucking hell.
It's really, really unfortunate. She was so old. Why couldn't you have just let her like live? You know what when I say that, I mean, like, she was just so old and frail. She didn't have a lot of time left. Like, why would you do that?
Well, and she needed medication, you know?
Yeah, she was on heart medication.
She needed to survive, you know?
And she had a pacemaker.
I feel like it's one of those things where, like, a group of, like, maybe one or two people, maybe more, I don't know, all sat around and conspired that they were going to do this thing, but they're just not very good at it. Or it's like something they thought of like movies or whatever. You know what I mean? Like they just don't seem professional.
The theory circulating was that because Savannah had done a segment a couple weeks before showing her mom's house and where she lived, that person had just thought, oh,
yeah, that's a money grab. Yeah.
And knew the layout somewhat and enough to be able to go there. It's just so sad. So sad.
Yeah. It's just unnecessary, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they still didn't get anything out of it. So we're going to move on from that for a second because I also have other news to tell you all.
Oh.
And this concerns Autumn.
Shit. Okay.
So, fun fact, Erin's happy fact. I recently celebrated a birthday.
No. We're not doing this on air.
We are.
No, we're not.
Here's the deal. I recently celebrated a birthday, and I wrote on my personal Instagram page what age I was turning. All right? We all understand this? That's where we're at. So I write, I'm turning X amount of age. So then Autumn responds and says that I'm a year older. And I was like, bitch, I know how old I am. Jesus fucking Christ. Also, Autumn and I are the same age now. Just so you know. But Autumn believed since her birthday, which was months and months and months ago, that she was a year older. So on my birthday, Autumn actually got to age 1 year back because she believed that she was a year older. And I think that's funny.
This isn't the first time I've done this either.
Maybe in your older years, Autumn, you're forgetting how old you are.
Yeah, my eyes are watering.
Yeah, when she wrote me, I was like, girl, I know how old I am. What the hell? Do you know how old? You don't know how old you are.
No, Hannah did that to me too. She was like, what the fuck? That's not how old you are. I was like, oh shit, you're right. She's like, why do you always try to make yourself so much older than what you are? I'm like, I don't have any idea.
I'm sorry. You were also aging me in that as well. Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Isn't that ridiculous? I cannot.
Oh my God. I'm guilty.
Guilty as charged.
My goodness. I can't. I know.
Yeah.
I was so confident when I told you to. I was like, what the hell? She's wrong.
But yeah, she was very confident. Coming in hot. You don't even know how old you are. I'm like, bitch. Yeah.
Well, there's that. Oh,
So I turned a year older, Autumn turned a year younger, and somehow we're the same age. And that's what happened.
We're the same age. This is accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
So anyways, yes, I did celebrate a birthday. I am older now, not as old as Autumn still, but it is
my
fun.
God, she's so many months younger. The horror.
Clearly it shows.
Fuck, I guess.
Because I at least know how old I am. Jesus fucking Christ.
I'm losing my shit over here.
I've been saying it for years.
Yeah. Well, you win.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think it's time to get started on our cases. Autumn is going first this week, and then I will be following it up. This is the last of our Pride series. Of course, we cover cases for everybody all year long, but we've been specifically focused on LGBTQIA plus stories this month. So, without further ado, a younger Autumn is going to tell us a story.
Yeah, younger than I thought I was last week, that's for sure.
That is for sure. So, Autumn, let her rip.
This is a very famous case. And so the second I tell you the name of the episode, everyone's going to know. That's okay.
That's okay.
Because it's a very important one.
Okay.
The title is Brandon Teena, Living Authentically in a World That Refused to Let Him.
1,000% know exactly this one.
Yes, this is a very famous case.
Very famous case. And very famous movie.
Very famous movie.
Yes. All right, let's hear it.
Today, we're talking about a case that has become one of the most significant true crime stories in LGBTQ plus history. Not only because of the horrific violence that took place, but because of the person at the center of it all. This episode is about Brandon Teena. You may have heard his name before. Maybe you've seen the 1999 film Boys Don't Cry. Maybe you've heard his story discussed during Pride Month or in conversations about hate crimes against transgender people. But if that's all you've heard, then you've only heard a fraction of who Brandon was. Because before he became a headline, before he became a symbol, before his name appeared in history books, he was simply a young man trying to build the life he always believed he deserved. Like so many of the cases we cover, Brandon wasn't asking for anything extraordinary. He wanted friends. He wanted love. He wanted acceptance. He wanted the freedom to wake up each morning as himself. Instead, he found himself in a small Nebraska town where secrets traveled fast, prejudice ran deep, and being different could make you a target. Today's episode includes discussions of sexual assault, hate-motivated violence, and murder. While I'll be handling those topics as respectfully as possible, I wanted to give that warning up front. This isn't just a story of how Brandon died. It's a story of how he lived. So, let's begin. Brandon Teena was born on December 12, 1972, in Lincoln, Nebraska. At birth, he was assigned female and given the name Teena Renee Brandon. But from a very young age, Brandon understood something about himself that people around him didn't. He saw himself as a boy. This wasn't something that suddenly appeared during adolescence. Friends and family would later recall that Brandon gravitated towards boys' clothing, boys' activities, and preferred presenting himself as male throughout much of his childhood. In the early 1980s, there wasn't conversations about transgender identities happening in small Midwestern towns. There wasn't language that helped explain what Brandon was experiencing. There wasn't resources online. There weren't support groups just a click away. Instead, there was confusion, judgment, and often rejection. Brandon grew up primarily with his mother, Joanne Brandon, after his father died in a car accident 8 months before he was born. Life wasn't particularly easy. Money was tight. The family struggled. Like many teenagers searching for belonging, Brandon often found himself feeling like an outsider. But there was something remarkable about him that nearly everyone who met him mentioned: his personality. People described Brandon as charismatic, funny, kind, playful. He loved making people laugh. He had an infectious smile. He flirted. He joked constantly. He made friends almost effortlessly. And, perhaps most importantly, he made people feel seen. That gift would become one of the reasons so many people were drawn to him. As Brandon entered his late teens and early 20s, he began living openly as a man whenever he could. He introduced himself as Brandon. He cut his hair short. He dressed in masculine clothing. He wrapped his chest. He passed as male to many of the people he met. Today, we understand that many transgender people describe this as living authentically. In the early 1990s, it was much more complicated. Brandon was constantly navigating a world that questioned his identity. He moved around frequently, worked odd jobs, stayed with friends. Sometimes he slept wherever he could. He wasn't searching for fame. He wasn't trying to deceive people for entertainment. He was trying to survive as himself. That distinction is incredibly important because later, after his death, some media coverage focused almost entirely on the idea that Brandon had somehow been pretending. But the people closest to him consistently described something different. They described someone who was genuinely living as a man, someone who desperately wanted to be accepted that way. In late 1993, Brandon arrived in Falls City, Nebraska. Population, just over 4,000 people. One of those places where everyone seems to know everyone else, where family names matter, where newcomers immediately attract attention. For Brandon, though, Falls City initially felt promising. He quickly made friends. He joined people for nights out. He laughed easily. He fit in. Several people later said they had absolutely no idea Brandon was transgender. To them, he was simply another young man who had recently moved into town. That was exactly what Brandon wanted. For perhaps one of the first times in his life, he felt like he belonged. Not long after arriving, Brandon met 19-year-old Lana Tisdale. Lana was warm, outgoing, and immediately connected with Brandon. The attraction between them grew quickly. Friends remembered them spending nearly every day together, driving around, listening to music, talking for hours, going out with friends. Like so many young couples, they seemed excited about the future. Lana later described Brandon as thoughtful and affectionate. He opened doors for her, bought her little gifts, made her laugh constantly. She believed she had finally met someone who genuinely cared for her. And Brandon? He appeared happy, happier than he'd been in a very long time. For someone who had spent years searching for acceptance, being loved for who he was must have felt extraordinary. But along with Lana came a new circle of friends. Among them were two men, John Lauder and Tom Nesson. At first glance, they all appeared to get along. They drank together, went to parties, hung out late into the night. Brandon seemed accepted by them. Unfortunately, appearances can be deceiving. Lauder and Nissen had reputations for violence. Both had criminal histories. Both were known for aggressive behavior. Yet, in a small town, people often overlook those reputations. No one could have imagined just how dangerous these friendships would become. As Brandon and Lana's relationship became more serious, rumors slowly started circulating. Some people began questioning Brandon's identity. Small towns have a way of turning whispers into certainty almost overnight.
And they spread quick.
Very quick. I mean, population 4,000 people. I mean, all you have to tell is Mima, and she's going to tell everyone.
Exactly.
Someone claimed Brandon wasn't who he said he was. Someone else repeated it. Then another. Eventually, those rumors reached John Lauder and Tom Nissen. At first, they didn't believe them. But curiosity turned into confrontation. And Brandon suddenly found himself facing questions he had spent years trying to avoid. Questions that weren't simply invasive. They were dangerous. Because in 1993, being openly transgender in rural Nebraska wasn't just socially difficult. For many people, it could be life-threatening. As 1993 came to an end, the group gathered for Christmas celebrations. Like so many people, they were drinking, loud music, friends coming and going. Everyone seemed focused on welcoming a new year and celebrating the holidays. But beneath the surface, tension was building. Rumors had grown louder. Suspicions had intensified. And Brandon had no way of knowing that before the first week of 1994 could begin, everything would change. The new year should have represented fresh beginnings. Instead, it became the beginning of the final chapter of Brandon's life. Brandon had finally found something he'd spent much of his life searching for. He had friends. He had a girlfriend he genuinely cared about. For a brief moment, Falls City felt like a place where he could simply exist as himself. But in a small town, secrets have a way of surfacing. As rumors about Brandon's identity spread, the atmosphere around him began to change. One of the pivotal moments came when Brandon was arrested on a relatively minor charge related to check forgery. During the booking process, authorities recorded information based on the sex assigned to him at birth. Word of the arrest spread quickly, and people in the community who saw the paperwork or heard about it began questioning Brandon's identity. Not only that, they published it in the newspaper under his birth name.
Which is so dangerous.
Yes, so everyone in town knew at that point. Those rumors eventually reached two men Brandon considered part of his social circle, John Lauder and Tom Nissen. According to testimony and later court records, they confronted Brandon about the rumors. What happened next fundamentally changed the course of his life. After a Christmas Eve gathering, Brandon was forcibly taken by the two men to a secluded location. There, he was physically assaulted and sexually assaulted. The attack was intended to humiliate and intimidate him after they learned he was transgender. Out of respect for Brandon and for listeners who may find these details distressing, I'm not going to describe the assault beyond that point. What matters is that Brandon survived it, and despite what he'd endured, he made an incredibly courageous decision. He chose to report the crime. That decision wasn't an easy one. Reporting a sexual assault is difficult under any circumstances. Reporting one in a small town where everyone knows one another and where Brandon already knew people were questioning his identity required enormous courage. Brandon went to the Richardson County Sheriff's Office and spoke with the Sheriff, Charles Lowe. Today, that interview is one of the most discussed aspects of this case. Rather than focusing solely on the violent crime Brandon had reported, much of the questioning centered on Brandon's identity and his body. Investigators asked personal questions that many critics later argued were irrelevant to investigating the assault itself.
Because they were irrelevant and they were to hurt him.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't to investigate
It had
the assault.
nothing to do with the investigation.
No, they were trying to humiliate him a second time. Some of the interview was recorded, and years later, portions became public. Listening to it can be deeply uncomfortable, not because Brandon is anything less than forthcoming, but because the conversation often seems to drift away from the crime and toward Brandon's identity. Brandon answered the questions, even the invasive ones. He was trying to cooperate. He wanted the people responsible for assaulting him to be held accountable. Law enforcement did begin investigating, but no immediate arrests were made. Brandon remained in Falls City. Looking back, many people have asked the same heartbreaking question. Could more have been done to protect him? It's impossible to know with certainty what might have happened under different circumstances. But what we do know is that Brandon expressed fear. He understood that the men who had assaulted him knew where he was, and he had reason to believe he was still in danger. In the days that followed, Brandon stayed with friends, including Lisa Lambert. Lisa lived in a farmhouse outside Falls City with her infant son. Also staying there was Philip Devine, who was dating Lisa's sister. For Brandon, the farmhouse felt like a place of relative safety. He was surrounded by people who accepted him and cared about him. But John Lauder and Tom Nissen also knew where he was. Around 1 a.m. on December 31st, 1993, only days after the assault had been reported, the two men drove to the farmhouse. Evidence presented at trial showed they entered the home looking for Brandon. What followed was devastating. They found Lisa Lambert in bed and demanded to know where Brandon was. Lisa refused to tell them. Tom Nissen searched and found him hiding under a blanket at the foot of the bed. The men asked Lisa if there was anyone else in the house, and she replied that Philip Devine was staying with her. The duo then shot Brandon in the stomach. Tom Nissen testified in court that he had noticed that Brandon was twitching and asked John Lauder for a knife, with which he used to stab Brandon in the chest to ensure that he was dead. Tom later testified that he shot Lisa in the stomach. After leaving the room to find Philip and then returning with him, Tom shot Lisa a second time. The two men then took Philip into the living room, sat him on the couch, and shot him twice. Tom then returned to the bedroom where he shot Lisa a few more times. The two men then left, threw their weapons and gloves onto a frozen river, and returned to Falls City. Brandon Teena, Lisa Lambert, and Philip Devine were all dead.
It's just so awful.
It's so senseless. So senseless. Lisa's infant son, who was in the house at the time, was physically unharmed. The killings shocked Falls City. What had begun as rumors and prejudice had escalated into multiple homicides, leaving an entire community trying to understand how events had spiraled so quickly. Investigators quickly focused on Lauder and Nissen. Witness statements and physical evidence linked them to the crime, and both men were arrested within days. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Brandon's murder could not be separated from the assault that had preceded it. The violence had escalated over a matter of days, and the earlier attack and Brandon's attempt to seek justice became central to understanding everything that followed. In the years since, legal scholars, journalists, and LGBTQ+ advocates have pointed to Brandon's experience as an example of the challenges transgender victims often faced when interacting with the criminal justice system in that era. The questions raised by the investigation weren't only about the actions of two violent individuals, but also about whether the system recognized the seriousness of the danger Brandon was in. It's important to remember, though, that Brandon's story isn't defined solely by what happened in those final days. Friends remembered someone who loved making people laugh, someone who was generous, affectionate, and hopeful, someone who wanted an ordinary life, a job, relationships, and the chance to be accepted for who he was. Those memories are just as much part of this story as the tragedy that followed. Investigators had identified John Lauder and Tom Nissen as the primary suspects in the murders of Brandon Teena, Lisa Lambert, and Philip Devine. The violence that had unfolded over just a few days had left an entire community searching for answers. Almost immediately, investigators began piecing together what had happened inside the farmhouse. Witness statements, physical evidence, and the timeline established after Brandon reported the earlier assault painted a picture of escalating violence. Authorities arrested both Lauder and Nissen. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors argued that the murders were the culmination of the events that began when Brandon's identity became known to the two men. The prosecution presented evidence that the assault and the killings were connected and that Brandon had been specifically targeted. The trials themselves drew significant public attention. Tom Nissen eventually entered a plea agreement in exchange for testifying against John Lauder. He pled guilty to murder charges and received multiple life sentences. His testimony became one of the prosecution's most important pieces of evidence because it provided jurors with a firsthand account of the events leading up to and following the murders. John Lauder chose to go to trial. Prosecutors argued that he had been the driving force behind the violence. Witness testimony, forensic evidence, and Nissen's account were presented to the jury. After deliberation, the jury found Lauder guilty. He was sentenced to death. Over the years, Lauder pursued numerous appeals, as is common in death penalty cases. While various legal arguments were raised regarding his conviction and sentence, the convictions themselves remained in place. Nissen, meanwhile, continues to serve multiple life sentences. The legal proceedings brought some measure of accountability, but they couldn't answer the questions that so many people continued to ask. Could Brandon's death have been prevented? It's a difficult question because none of us can rewrite history. What we do know is this. Brandon did exactly what many people are told to do after surviving a violent crime. He reported it, he cooperated with investigators, he answered difficult questions, he trusted the system to protect him. That reality has made his case an important part of discussion among leading legal scholars, victim advocates, and LGBTQ plus organizations for decades. Many have argued that Brandon's experience highlighted broader issues and how victims of sexual assault, and particularly transgender victims, were treated by the criminal justice system during that period. The conversations sparked by Brandon's case became part of a much larger movement advocating for more specific and respectful treatment of victims, improved law enforcement training, and greater awareness of violence directed at transgender people. Several years later, Brandon's story reached an even wider audience. In 1999, the film Boys Don't Cry was released. The movie introduced millions of people to Brandon's story, many of whom had never heard of him before. Hilary Swank portrayed Brandon and later received the Academy Award for Best Actress. The film was widely praised for bringing attention to Brandon's life and the prejudice he faced. Though, like many films based on real events, it condensed timelines and combined certain details for storytelling purposes. For many viewers, it was the first introduction to the realities faced by transgender people in America during the early 1990s.
I vividly remember when that movie came out, and one thing that I think of, it was a time where people didn't know anything really, or had
or
any
understood
feeling
at all.
So I think what the great thing that film did is it humanized a trans person to people who wouldn't necessarily have even had the opportunity to meet one.
100%.
It was a huge deal. And then when Hilary Swank won the Academy Award for it, it was crazy.
It was a very pivotal moment, I feel like. Joanne Brandon publicly objected to the media referring to her child as he and Brandon. Following Hilary Swank's Oscar acceptance speech, Joanne Brandon took offense at Swank for thanking Brandon Teena and referring to him as a man. That set me off, said Joanne Brandon. She should not stand up there and thank my child. I get tired of people taking credit for what they don't know. However, in 2013, Joanne told a reporter that she accepted Teena being referred to as transgender in the media. Although she was unhappy with how Boys Don't Cry portrayed the situation, she said about the film, it gave them, meaning gay and transgender advocates, a platform to voice their opinions, and I'm glad of that. There were a lot of people who didn't understand what it was. I'm not going to
including her.
Yes, she keeps using.
Come on now.
She keeps using his dead name, and I'm not really. It's kind of it's complicated because that's technically what he went by his last name, but it's not.
And when you're doing direct quotes, it's hard to navigate which ones to use. I totally get that.
100%. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful. His mother referred to him as Teena. So she says there were a lot of people who didn't understand what it was that Teena was going through. We've come a long way. When asked how the murder affects her life today, Joanne replied, I wonder about how my life would be different if she was still here with me. She would be such a joy to have around. She was always such a happy kid. I imagine her being a happy adult. Adding she would accept Brandon living as a man, although she's still using
not
her
really
pronouns.
accepting. And remember, Brandon didn't live with his mother anymore for a reason. Just saying.
Yes. So take that as you will. I
Yeah.
had to throw that in there because it is important to his story.
Yes.
Even today, Brandon's story continues to be taught in university courses covering criminal justice, gender studies, journalism, and LGBTQ plus history. His name has become part of conversations about hate crimes, victim advocacy, and the importance of treating every person with dignity. It's also important to remember that Brandon wasn't the only victim. Lisa Lambert lost her life after opening her home to a friend. Philip Devine, who was at the farmhouse that morning, was also murdered. For years, some discussions of this case gave far less attention to Philip's story than Brandon's. More recent accounts have worked to recognize all three victims and acknowledge the devastating impact their deaths had on the people who loved them. When we cover cases on this podcast, I always try to remember that behind every headline is a person. Someone who laughed, someone who had plans, someone who had people waiting for them to come home. That's certainly true here. When Brandon is remembered only for the violence he endured, we risk overlooking the person he was. Friends describe someone who was funny, generous, charming, and deeply hopeful. He wasn't trying to become famous. He wasn't trying to become a symbol. He simply wanted to live openly as himself. That desire to be known, accepted, and loved is something most of us can understand, regardless of our own experiences. Brandon's story asks us to consider what can happen when prejudice goes unchecked, when victims aren't fully heard, and when people are denied the dignity of simply being themselves. It also reminds us that compassion matters, listening matters, believing victims matters, treating every person with humanity matters. Those lessons are just as relevant today as they were more than 30 years ago. Before we wrap up, I also wanted to acknowledge that Pride Month isn't only about celebrating progress. It's also about remembering people whose lives shaped the progress, often at an unimaginable cost. Brandon Teena is one of those people. His life continues to inspire conversations about equality, justice, and the importance of creating communities where people can live authentically without fear. If his story encourages even one listener to approach someone different from themselves with a little more empathy, then perhaps that's one small way his legacy continues. My sources were the trial records from the state of Nebraska, contemporary reporting from the Lincoln Journal-Star and the Omaha World Herald, court opinions relating to the convictions of John Lauder and Tom Nissen, Boys Don't Cry, and interviews discussing the production, reporting and educational resources from organizations documenting the history of anti-transgender violence in the United States, and Wikipedia.
That is one of the ones that stands out the most to me. I feel like there's, Matthew Shepard, Brandon Teena, like those are the ones that, because they happen in our era of when we were growing up as teenagers, those are the ones that really sit with me because it was such a moment in time. We were literal teenagers when all of this happened. So they really stand out, I think, to me, especially on just that those cases were huge at the time and they were teenagers just as we were. So, I'm glad that you covered that case. It is uber famous, but I'm glad you still did it.
It's just so senseless to me.
Well, and that 3 people lost their lives over it.
3 people lost their lives for someone just wanting to be themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, what the fuck?
Exactly.
I'll never understand.
I'll never understand. It's funny because I say, well, I can understand some murders, but there are those
right?
ones
Like
that
those
are
rage-filled ones. You're like, damn, that person was annoying. Okay, girl, I got you, but like, not this.
Yes, exactly. This doesn't make any sense. So we're going to move on to my case now. I am doing one that is also famous, kind of similar-ish time periods, a little bit earlier than yours, but it's a very interesting case with a brand new update that came from 2023. So,
ooh,
this is Billy London, the Black Dahlia of West Hollywood. Los Angeles has a way of swallowing people. Every year, thousands arrive carrying little more than a suitcase and the hope that somewhere between the glow of the neon lights and endless palm trees, they will find themselves. Some come for reinvention, and quite a few others come chasing stardom. For many gay men in the 1980s, Los Angeles, and especially West Hollywood, offered something even more valuable: the chance to live openly. But by the autumn of 1990, that promise existed alongside another reality. The AIDS epidemic had already stolen thousands of lives. Fear hung over the community. Friends disappeared with heartbreaking regularity. Families sometimes refused to even claim their loved ones. Yet despite the grief, West Hollywood remained vibrant, a neighborhood where drag queens, artists, musicians, activists, bartenders, dancers, and dreamers built chosen families and community. It was into that world that a young man from Wisconsin found his own reinvention. He called himself Billy London. Friends remembered him as funny, creative, and endlessly expressive. He wrote poetry. He loved decorating film sets. He dreamed of opening his own creative business one day. More than anything, he wanted a future. He was 25 years old. Then, over Halloween week in 1990, Billy disappeared. The next day, an unhoused person searching through a dumpster behind a Hollywood business made a discovery so shocking that veteran detectives struggled to comprehend it. For more than 3 decades, the murder remained one of Los Angeles' most disturbing unsolved crimes, only to be solved by a group with an amateur sleuth, podcasters, a documentarian, and detectives, culminating in a real-time confession. But before we get into all of that, within the local LGBTQ plus community, people had whispered about this crime for years. Some even gave it a nickname, the Gay Black Dahlia. But that title obscured the person at the center of the story, because before he became an unsolved case, before he became a headline, before he became a cautionary tale, he was William Newton. And this is his story. If Los Angeles was where Billy London became known, Wisconsin was where William Arnold Newton first learned what it meant to feel alone. William, known to his friends and family as Bill or Billy, was born July 26, 1965, in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. He entered a world that never seemed to stand still. His mother struggled with instability, and throughout his childhood, Billy moved from town to town, rarely staying in school long enough to form lasting friendships. Years later, those who researched his life would discover something heartbreaking. Because he moved so often, almost no one from his childhood remembered growing up with him. When most of us think back to elementary school, we remember classmates, birthday parties, neighborhood friends, teachers whose names we can still recite decades later. Billy had almost none of that. Instead, his life became a series of introductions followed by goodbyes. Home was never a place. It was something he constantly was trying to find. Those who knew him later in life described him as deeply creative. He drew, he wrote poetry, he loved fashion and color. He saw beauty where others overlooked it. Even before he stepped onto a film set, Billy wanted to make ordinary places feel extraordinary. That creativity would eventually become one of the defining traits people remember about him. But first, he had to survive to adolescence. By his mid-teens, Billy already understood something about himself that many young people spend their lives trying to define. He was gay. He grew up in the Midwest during the late 1970s and early 80s, and it was rarely easy for LGBTQ youth at that time. Public acceptance was limited. Coming out often meant risking rejection from classmates, employers, churches, and most likely your own family. For Billy, those fears became reality. At 16 years old, after years of moving with his mother, Billy ran away, hoping to live with his father in Oklahoma. It must have felt like a chance to finally belong. Instead, according to those closest to him, his father answered the door, rejected him because he was gay, called him a slur, and slammed the door in his face.
Fuck.
He was 16 years old. And suddenly, he had nowhere to go. It's difficult to overstate how profoundly a moment like this can shape someone's life. For many LGBTQ people of Billy's generation, family rejection wasn't simply emotional. It meant homelessness. It meant sleeping wherever you could. It meant taking whatever work you could find. Billy entered adulthood carrying that rejection. Yet he never stopped imagining a different future. Instead of giving up, he found direction. He trained as a beautician, eventually earning his cosmetology license in 1984. Hair and makeup weren't just jobs. They were artistic outlets. They allowed him to create, transform, and express himself in a way that felt truly authentic. By 1985, at just 20 years old, Billy headed west. Like thousands before him, he arrived in Los Angeles carrying little more than hope. West Hollywood in the mid-1980s was unlike anywhere else in America. It was a place where gay bars stayed busy, artists filled tiny apartments, drag performers became local celebrities, and chosen families often meant more than blood relatives. For someone who had spent much of his life searching for acceptance, West Hollywood offered something extraordinary, the possibility of being seen. Billy found work doing hair, makeup, choreography, and eventually he earned his GED while building his new life. Friends later remembered that although he occasionally appeared confident, even glamorous beneath the lights, that confidence often hid deep insecurity. He wanted desperately to be loved, to be accepted, and to build a life based on creativity instead of survival. For the first time in years, Billy wasn't just surviving. He was beginning to imagine that future. He took a job at the Hollywood Spa, one of the largest and longest-running gay bathhouses in LA, with 100 rooms and over 100,000 visitors a year. That is where he met Mark Rabins, a.k.a. David Ray, who became his lover. Rabins helped him break into the adult film industry, where he had made 5 films. The couple founded London Ray Productions, which they made 8 films between 1987 and 1990. He wrote, he sketched ideas. He dreamed of owning a creative business that combined interior design, artwork, and writing. According to Rabins, Billy already had a name picked out. He wanted to call it Isms. When Mark asked him why, Billy smiled and answered, "Everybody has isms." It's such a simple sentence. It tells us something important about the young man at the center of the story. He didn't dream of becoming famous. He didn't dream of becoming wealthy. He dreamt of creating beautiful things and places for everyone. Unfortunately, like so many gay men living in Los Angeles in the mid-1980s, Billy's new beginning unfolded beneath a growing shadow. A mysterious illness was sweeping through the community. Hospitals are filling. Funerals became routine. Friends disappeared with terrifying speed. The AIDS epidemic would nearly shape every aspect of life in West Hollywood. And West Hollywood itself, by the 1980s, was a city built in defiance. A few square miles tucked in Los Angeles County, It became one of the only places in the United States where the LGBTQ people could live with something approaching visibility. Not safety, not exactly, but visibility. And in the era of the AIDS crisis, even that was radical. By 1990, the visibility came with a contradiction. On one hand, West Hollywood was alive in a way few places were. Music spilled out of clubs onto Santa Monica Boulevard. Drag performers filled packed bars. Gay bookstores, bathhouses, gyms, and cafes formed a dense ecosystem of community life. People built families here that didn't require permission. On the other hand, grief was everywhere. AIDS reshaped the rhythm of daily life. For many, survival meant learning to live inside of that tension, joy, and loss, occupying the same night and even the same room. Billy had continued to work in the adult film industry. He didn't see himself as a porn star. He considered himself an artist and a poet who was only doing porn to pay the bills. When Los Angeles County ordered all bathhouses, including the Hollywood Spa, to shut down in 1988, he needed money more than ever. By August 1990, Billy was couch surfing with a throuple in West Hollywood. He was planning a move to Las Vegas with his half-sister Michelle Oliver to help his mother get settled in after a move to a new place. He filmed his last scene the day before he died. He called a friend that day who said Billy sounded upbeat, optimistic, and happy about his future. He had recently kicked a drug habit, a symptom of his lifelong compulsive personality, and seemed to be on a path to health. Nevertheless, it was known that Billy had taken methamphetamines somewhat on a regular basis on the weekends. He was just 4 days away from escaping Los Angeles for good, said Mark Rabins. On October 29, 1990, Billy told his roommates he was going to rent a movie. He actually went to Rage nightclub, where he sat alone having drinks all afternoon. He left the bar around 3 p.m., and then he just vanished forever. Rage nightclub was one of the major gathering spaces of the era. They drew huge crowds, music, dancing, nightclubs that functioned both as celebration and escape. It was the final stretch of Halloween week, one of the busiest times of the year for the city's nightlife. Clubs were crowded, streets were active late into the night, and Santa Monica Boulevard pulsed with people who had come to be seen, to disappear into costumes, or simply feel less alone for a few hours. What we know is that Billy Newton spent part of the night at Rage. After that night, Billy was seen leaving the club area. On October 30th, 1990, an unhoused person made a discovery that would freeze this case in place for more than 30 years. Inside a dumpster behind a commercial property were several black plastic bags. Inside those bags were human remains. Billy Newton's head and both feet had been placed in there. The rest of his body was never recovered. From the beginning, investigators understood they were dealing with an exceptionally violent homicide, but the condition of the remains also complicated the investigation. Without a full body, without a clear scene of death, and without witnesses who could place Billy's final moments, detectives were left with more questions than answers. Retired LAPD detective Wendy Burnt, who was assigned to the case at the time, still remembers that day as hot and humid, the heat just packing down on the taped-off crime scene. The sun was shining very, very bright, including on Newton's handsome face and bright blue eyes, which stared back at her from the dumpster. It was just so heinous in my mind that something like this could happen. And it didn't matter to me that Bill was gay or that he worked in the pornography field, Burnt said. It was a murder that I felt was my responsibility to solve, so I put everything into this case. The early investigation moved quickly in a way that homicide cases often do at first. Interviews, canvassings, attempts to trace Billy's last known movements. Friends and acquaintances were questioned. Locations where he had visited were checked. But the further investigators went, the more the case began to lose definition. There were no immediate arrests, no clear suspect, no confirmed motive. What remained instead was a young man who had disappeared into the night and a crime scene that had been partially discarded into a dumpster in Hollywood. Homicide detectives with the Los Angeles Police Department diligently pursued the case and kept running into dead ends in a community with good reason to distrust them. For the next 30 years, Billy Newton remained one of LA's many unavenged souls. The LAPD's interviews and investigative notes went cold. His murder became an unfair commentary about Hollywood's gay underbelly and the supposed wickedness of sex work. There were whispers that Billy's murder could have been the work of infamous serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. However, that ended up becoming debunked. Dahmer himself denied the killing. We were sharing a world with serial killers, some of whom were gay themselves, preying on gay men. That was the climate we were living in. We just didn't know it yet, said Chris Bohl, who worked at The Advocate in New York City in the fall of 1990. You can understand why they would consider Dahmer. And they had a description of the person that Billy had last been seen with leaving Rage nightclub. One of the bartenders literally said a Jeffrey Dahmer lookalike. Authorities couldn't prove definitively that Dahmer wasn't there. The murder was in a short window of time that they couldn't account for his whereabouts. But they didn't truly believe Billy was a Dahmer victim. Like I said, 30 years had gone by. And this is the part that makes my podcast heart all aflutter. In a twist that most true crime fans can only dream of, a team of amateur internet sleuths help crack this case. In 2023, a pair of cold case detectives confirmed they had secured a confession in the Billy Newton murder. And this is how it happened. The suspect was first identified as a person of interest in Newton's murder, not by detectives, but by Clark Williams, a stay-at-home dad turned empty nester. Clark became obsessed with the case after seeing so many similarities between the dead man and himself. He and Newton were born just a week apart in 1965 in the same part of northern Wisconsin. While Clark was researching, a documentarian named Rachel Mason had just learned of Newton's murder by accident while researching for her documentary about Circus of Books, the adult bookstore on Santa Monica Boulevard where her parents had spent years selling pornography and LGBTQ literature. She wanted to show the real lives of the young men in the magazine and films on her parents' shelves, people who were also their friends and neighbors. During her research, a news article from 1990 fell out of a notebook, and Mason said the headline leaped out at her. Cops have no clues in grisly killing of LA porn actor. Now, she was looking into the murder. Around the same time, authors Christopher Rice and Eric Shaw Quinn, who run a podcast called The Dinner Party Show, began their own dive into Newton's murder. They put out a call for tips in the community, conducting interviews, and in October 2020, just a few days before the murder's 30th anniversary, they broadcasted an episode about it. The podcast generated a lot of tips and piqued the interest of Detective John Lamberti, who worked at the Los Angeles Police Department. I have a shelf full of cold cases. And when I pulled Billy's off the shelf, I Googled his name and I found your podcast, Lamberti told Christopher Rice. If not for you, I might have put it back on the shelf.
Damn.
I
That's
know.
awesome.
We cried in the studio when we heard that, said Christopher. Lamberti said he was struck by the amount of work his predecessors had done to no avail. So shortly after listening to that podcast episode, he reopened the case. Materials from cold LAPD homicide cases are usually contained in a single 3-ring binder, 3.5 inches thick. But the materials about Newton's murder, much of it compiled by Wendy Burnt, filled 6 of them, each crammed with meticulous notes, theories, interview transcripts, and photographs. They investigated the hell out of this case, Lamberti said. He contacted Rice and Quinn and Mason as well, and they all started sharing information. They also got in touch with Newton's family, which supported reviving the case. It did bring back a lot of emotions, said Sister Michelle Oliver, now age 57, who was just 6 months younger than her brother. But at the same time, I thought this would be good, to get something out there that showed that we hadn't really forgotten about Bill. When Rachel put out her own requests for tips on her documentary, one of the people she heard back from was Clark Williams, the man who, like Newton, was from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. He said he might be able to fill in some gaps about Newton's life story, possibly by explaining how it was growing up in their hometown. So now we have a team formed that consisted of a documentarian, Rachel Mason, Clark Williams, the amateur sleuth, podcasters Christopher Rice and Eric Quinn, all on the case helping Detective Lamberti. In Clark's research, he had found perhaps the first local sleuth who ever worked on this case, Rick Paskey. Paskey, who has since died, used to operate a skate shop in West Hollywood, but also dabbled as a private investigator and devoted a large amount of time trying to solve Newton's murder, by including working closely with Wendy Burnt, the original investigator. Clark had also found out that Paskey was not only a local businessman, but also worked as a gay porn producer under the alias Richard Lawrence at the same time that Newton was in the industry. That sparked Clark's interest. He started reviewing credits from Paskey's films and looking at the names of the actors, producers, editors, so he could then try and find anyone who was alive to talk to them about their recollections. He focused mostly on the films that were around the time of Newton's murder, including one titled Devil and Danny Webster, which promoted a brand new actor named Billy Houston starring in that title role. Williams began researching Billy Houston, spending hours and hours digging through old newspaper records for any clues about who he might be, until he found one that gave him chills. It was a 2007 or 2008 article from Oklahoma about a self-proclaimed white supremacist and skinhead named Darrell Lynn Madden. Madden had pleaded guilty to killing a gay man in Oklahoma named Stephen Domer and another man named Bradley Qualls, who had been Madden's accomplice in the Domer murder. Madden and Qualls had gone out with the intent to kidnap a gay man as part of a gang initiation of Qualls into the Chaos Squad Skinheads, a white supremacist group according to accounts that Madden had provided to law enforcement and others. They pretended to be sex workers, luring Domer into a secluded area, restraining him in his own vehicle, then drove around beating him before strangling him with a coat hanger, according to Madden's accounts. They then dumped his body into a creek. Madden later shot and killed Qualls, fled that scene, and was shot by police before being taken into custody. At the bottom of the article Williams had found, it said Madden, whose eyebrows had been shaved off and replaced with the tattooed words skin and head, had formerly acted in gay porn. Madden's stage name was none other than Billy Houston. This was a coincidence that Clark could not ignore, so he dug up criminal records that placed Madden in LA around the time of Newton's murder, which was also the time when skinheads were causing widespread problems across Southern California. The idea that Madden could have been part of the gay community while running around with West Hollywood skinheads presented as a psychology that was quite dangerous. Author David McConnell had spoken to Madden for a book he had written called American Honor Killings. Clark ordered the book. He went through it with a yellow highlighter and was shocked yet again. Madden had not only confessed to killing Domer in Oklahoma City, according to the book, but also allegedly confessed to killing in LA too. Clark said he leaped out of his bed and stood silent for a moment. After reading that line, scared and not sure what to do, I realized that was a moment I was in over my head, Williams said to the LA Times.
Yeah.
And I needed to get that information as soon as possible to Detective Lamberti. Clark gave Lamberti a full background he worked up for Madden, plus additional background about skinheads operating in the area at the time, which was incredible. Detective Lamberti and his partner, Detective Tamara Momayez, began digging into Madden. They discovered that the gay porn production company that Madden had worked for was in the same building on Santa Monica Boulevard that backed into the alley where Newton's head and feet had been found. Between that information and the book's description of Madden saying he killed in LA, it was enough for detectives to fly to Oklahoma to meet Daryl Lynn Madden in person. On January 4th, 2023, the detectives sat down with Madden. And Autumn, brace yourself, who now identifies as a transgender woman and Orthodox Jew named Daryl Lynn. We are talking about a person who has swastikas tattooed and is also wearing a knitted pink yarmulke, Lamberti said. We're talking to someone who is a gay porn actor, transgender skinhead, Nazi Orthodox Jew. You can't write that down in a sentence. They started out asking Madden about her life. Lamberti said Madden described living a triple life, acting in porn as Billy, earning cash as a sex worker named Lynn, and running around robbing and pillaging people who were gay as a skinhead named Richie Rich. Eventually, the detectives eased into the subject of Newton's murder, and Madden came clean. Lamberti said confessing in a recorded interview to abducting him on Santa Monica Boulevard at dusk. According to Lamberti, Madden told detectives that she and skinhead friends had seen Newton walking along the street and basically targeted him for robbery. Madden said she approached Newton and kind of put her arm around his shoulder, then calmly told him that they were going to rob him and probably beat the crap out of him. That's a quote. And when he was going to go with them without making a scene, Lamberti said that Madden told them she couldn't remember where they had taken Newton, but she ended up strangling him, and that matched the coroner's findings. Madden said she believed Newton was high at the time, which also matched the coroner's findings that Newton had methamphetamine in his system. The timing and location of the attack, Madden described, also matched other witness statements about Newton leaving Rage. Lamberti said it was enough to convince him and Momayez that Madden was indeed the killer, and they had presented a criminal case against Madden to the LA prosecutors. Lamberti said that the office has since decided not to file charges against Madden, citing a lack of evidence beyond a confession. He said that prosecutors also pointed out the difficulty of proving Madden's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt after 30 years, and with so many unanswered questions remaining in the case. Nonetheless, the LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division is officially closing its investigation in consultation with Newton's family. We have enough to say that this is the suspect who did it, Lamberti said. Michelle Oliver, Billy's sister, said that her family is pleased by the work of the detectives and the sleuths. Having some kind of closure helps, she said, and she has accepted that prosecutors won't be pursuing a criminal case against Madden, given that she is already set to die in an Oklahoma prison. We understand that Los Angeles probably doesn't want to put this to trial, and there's no need for it. But still, many questions remain unanswered, she and others said. Where is the rest of my brother? Michelle Oliver said, noting that the rest of his body was never recovered. Why did he have to die? He wasn't the type of person to piss anyone off. Lamberti said that Madden told detectives after strangling Newton, she had left his body with her two friends. She was adamant that she did not dismember him. She knew the identities of her accomplices, but she would not name them. I may be a murderer, she told them, but I am not a snitch. Which is really fucking awful because they'll never be able to find out where the rest of his body is. When Rice and Quinn first decided to talk about Newton's murder on their podcast, they just wanted to make sure it wasn't lost to history. When Lombardi called them to tell them that Madden had confessed, it was beyond our wildest dreams, Quinn said. I cried. I broke down in tears. The two planned to celebrate Lombardi's news on their podcast with champagne. Mark Rabins, Billy's former partner, and Clark Williams were right there with them. Our last words to each other were, I love you, said Mark, now 68. I held on to that for so many years, and I guess I still do. Clark Williams is already doing a deep dive into the history of white supremacists and skinheads in LA in the early 1990s to find out who they were and if they had other victims. Rachel Mason released her documentary, My Brother's Killer, released on March 2026, to great acclaim. For 33 years, Billy Newton was only a distant memory. And if he was remembered at all, he was known as a gay porn star found in a dumpster. He had become a cautionary tale for every young gay man who comes to LA to become famous. Now his real story can finally be seen. With this case, there's no neat conclusion, but there's something else. There is remembrance. And in that remembrance, Billy Newton is no longer defined by the way his life ended in 1990. He is defined by the fact that people keep speaking his name long enough for his story to come back into view. And because of diligent work of a group of people and detectives who came together to make sure that Billy Newton, the person, not just the victim, would never be forgotten, they found a killer who would ultimately confess to the heinous crime. I'm going to end this case with the last poem that Billy ever wrote. It was written 2 days before he was gone. It's called Moving On. Absorbing knowledge in abundance, we further down the road. A fork we find without a sign. Exploring we must go. Take a chance, a circumstance, an adventure, a situation. Instinctively follow your heart and soul. Life is your creation. My sources were reporting and archival coverage of the Los Angeles Times on the 1990 West Hollywood homicide case and later investigative revisits, interviews, and documented research connected to the filmmaker Rachel Mason's work on Billy Newton's life and death, Our Lives Wisconsin, Milwaukee Magazine, Queerty, LA Pride, and the history of gay and lesbian life in Wisconsin. And just so you know, in that documentary that Rachel Mason put out, she went to the prison and interviewed Madden, who confessed to her on camera, on film. So, it just came out March 2026. There is nowhere to stream it. Trust, I tried. And that documentary is becoming very acclaimed, and it's doing very well at film festivals. So if you do get a chance to go see it, go check it out. I'm sure at some point it will be streaming and you can see it there as well. But insane to me that this case was essentially forgotten for 30 years until all these different people started somehow researching at the exact same time and then got connected together, met with these detectives, and solved the fucking case. Like, I can't even. I'm beyond. I think it's incredible that they found out who the killer was. I do believe that that is exactly who it is. It is really fucked up that she won't tell who the accomplices were. I mean, granted, she is in prison and is still operating as a skinhead, though she has tattooed over her eyebrows that said skin and head. And you'll see that. You'll see that in the pictures, because I'll post pictures on our Instagram page at Murder Not Murdering, and you'll see what she looks like now. But I mean, she was like an infamous skinhead, and she was a Nazi and now is Orthodox Jew. But I think still also identifies as Nazi and skinhead and gay and transgender. So she is just an oxymoron all to herself, but she is a very dangerous person and has killed 3 people. So, and that's all the only ones we know of, But it's just wild to me that all of this culminated because these random strangers were researching at the same time. Incredible. Glad they solved it. But that is my case for this week. Just so you know, new episodes are now coming out on Tuesdays. Woo!
Fun times.
It seems to be working out much better on Tuesdays. We seem to get a lot more listeners. So maybe it's just getting lost in the chaos of a Monday, you know? It's just what it is. So now new episodes will be out on Tuesdays. Do check us out on Instagram at Murder Not Murdering. We're also on TikTok, mnm.pod. We are on subreddit at Murder Not Murdering. And that's all of our things. Slide into our DMs if you want to tell us about a case. And we're going to be back with a brand new episode for you on what? Tuesday. So we will be back again next week. Thank you so much for listening to us. We appreciate all of you. Bye.
Bye.